News just in to CNN. Breaking news. The FAA is to issue an international notice to 737 MAX operators. Now, the agency says it will take immediate and appropriate action if it identifies a serious safety issue. It's unclear whether the statement will actually make any recommendations or simply repeat or reaffirm the previous basis and confidence in the aircraft. Let's go to Mary Schiavo, who's with me to just talk about this, the nature of this. What would you expect the FAA to say?
Oh, pretty much what they've said. The FAA is a very reactive organization, and frankly, they look to Boeing often to tell them the problems, the difficulties, what should be done, et cetera. Back when I was Inspector General, I was actually tasked to review the certification process of the 777, and Boeing self-certified, and that's probably a good thing because they have the technicians and the expertise to do it, but they self-certified 95% of that plane. The FAA will look to Boeing to take its cues, and I wouldn't necessarily assume that it is going to be the same guidance as with Lion Air. I think there are some significant differences here, and that's what the wait's about.
All right, Mary, I want you to stay with me because I want your input on to what we're just going to talk about, because Boeing is facing a crisis of confidence in its 737 MAX. Now, I must stress, it's not known if there's a link between this crash and the Lion Air crash. And whilst it's rare for a particular plane to have problems, there have been aircraft plagued by major design flaws. So you've got the Comet, which was actually the world's first commercial jetliner. Now, the Comet was launched in 1952 and gave Britain a lead in the race to make high-powered planes. But the hype didn't last long. 3 planes crashed over the next 2 years. Engineers found the fuselage didn't hold up under pressure. Then there was the DC-10, an American-made 3-engine plane. There's one from Laker Airways. It was first introduced in '69. It ultimately was a success, but had a relatively poor safety record early on. The DC-10 suffered 4 fatal crashes in '74 and 3 times in '79. The fleet was grounded for a while. The cause was metal fatigue, and the plane ceased production in '83. The manufacturer said there weren't enough orders. Now, Mary Schiavo, the Comet, the DC-10, you know, there have been examples before. I'm not suggesting necessarily that there is these 2 connections, but you know, the weight of history has to be on the regulators. That's right, the weight of history. And then we look at this, the 787, the Dreamliner with the battery fires too. Eventually that had to have an order as well. And so, you know, what happens is the regulators seem, at least the United States regulators, seem loath to do it. But in the long run, it is the thing that can install the corrective measures, and it can reinstall confidence in the plane. So the reluctance to do it sometimes baffles me, but the FAA is often slow to react, and sometimes they react to public pressure. That's what finally tips the scale. What's your view on this one? The lightning doesn't tend to strike, you know, it doesn't tend to strike directly twice. So the chance of it being the same idea of the MCAS, but at the same time, one can't ignore the similarities in the profile of phase of flight, new plane, and the profile of what happened during the flight. So I'm just going to open-endedly say to you, what do you make of it? Well, you know, you're absolutely right. They can't ignore the prior crash. That's what investigators do. They draw on their experience in prior crashes to see if, you know, did they not get it right? Did they not have enough remedial measures? I think it's far worse for Boeing if this is something else. If it is the same as Lion Air, they can say, look, you did not follow our guidance. You didn't have the training, you know, but it can't be. I don't think it's the angle of attack indicator. So let's say it's an airspeed indicator. But if it is something entirely different, yet
got another problem plaguing this plane, then what they're going to have to go back and see is, did they hang too many ornaments on a 1967 tree? Because this is a 1967 737 design and frame, and they put on heavy engines, and the nose tipped up, and so they tried to tweak it with a computer program. If this is yet something else plaguing the plane, I think it's even far worse for Boeing. And everybody has reason to be concerned, because it's, you know, it does look like a Comet or a DC-10 at this point, until the black box readouts, which I think will give us the answers probably later this week.
Mary, finally, I just want to touch on this. You would agree with me that Boeing has as much interest in understanding what happens, and sort of the idea that Boeing would somehow not wish to get to the bottom of this is simply not the case. They are as concerned, if not more so, and it's not going to be hidden away in a cupboard.
No. They have to get to the bottom of this, and I think that's why they haven't said anything. I think that it may not be the same, and they're waiting to see, because they wouldn't want to issue guidance and say, now get out there and get these pilots trained. I think maybe from ACAR's data, maybe from something, I think they already know there's more there, and they have to get to the bottom of it. They must, and they will, but I think there's more there.